Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second day of this conference related to us supporting the activities here in Africa. We are so excited about the opportunity to be here with you again this morning and to discuss what you're doing, how we can be a support to you, how the world can collaborate and come to your aid and want everything to be as it should be in Africa. As we've been talking about in the last day, we've discussed a lot of different activities and discovered there's a number of different places where a number of the African nations are. As you're well aware, 11 African nations have expressed interest in the utilization of nuclear. Several of you are further along than others, but it doesn't mean there can't be collaboration and communication to facilitate everybody's success. And so while we're here with you this morning, and as I said yesterday, we're acknowledging that because of the kinds of information and the experiences that have already been established and already been utilized to enhance and improve global best practices, we want that to be brought to every nation in Africa to facilitate all of your success. Because the reality is your continent has the capability to be one of the most successful continents on the planet to facilitate the implementation of nuclear. And as we look at this and we look at the various different levels of positions that you're in, we look at the ways in which this can be brought to bear. So there are a number of companies that are out here that want to support you, that are already supporting some of you in various levels. And as we're looking at this, we want you to make sure you're listening carefully and getting the information about where are your colleagues? What have they already experienced? How can you leverage that? How can we ensure your success, each one of your nation's success? In all of that, we're going to continue this morning with a number of presentations, and then we're also going to have a panel session. And we're going to continue through the morning into the afternoon with others. I have an opportunity myself to talk to you this afternoon about a number of the things that Excel is doing both here in Africa now and around the world to make sure that nuclear is implemented in the most cost-effective, time-effective, and quality manner possible, given everything that's happened. So we're pleased to do that. So it is my sincere hope that this will be beneficial to you, that this will be of value to you, and that you will ask the kinds of questions that you need to ask to make sure that you understand where things are and how it can benefit and assist you. So our first presentation this morning is going to be about the energy transition in Ghana. And that presentation is going to be given by Mr. Ahiataku-Togobo. So, Wisdom, if I could ask you to come to the stage, sir, please join me in welcoming him. Allows you to change the slide.
Right there. So it's here.
Yep.
Okay.
Got it? All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'll just go straight forward. As you can see, my name is Ahiataku-Togobo. I'd worked with the Ministry of Energy for some time as the Director for Renewable and Nuclear Energy for close to 12 years. Before moving to the Bui Power Authority, where I acted as the Director for Renewables there. But currently, I'm on retirement and I run my own small consultancy company. To go straight, you will agree with me that no country can develop economically without access to modern fuels. If you want to develop, if you want to industrialize, you need modern fuels, and the fuels should come cheap. Because if the fuel is expensive, you will not be able to compete. And the backbone of any industry, any industrial activity, is the availability of cheap power. But we must also understand that cheaper you go, the more the environment is destroyed. And I'll try to demonstrate this briefly. You all agree with me that until the mid-19th, we were all relying on renewable energy for most of our activities. We use biomass and coal for cooking and combustion. We use wind for milling, and mechanical power, we use human and animal power. But during the late 85, when fossil fuel was introduced, when electricity was introduced, and we had to use coal to burn power, you realize that we ended up emitting so much carbon dioxide, and that is what has led to the situation we are facing now, which we call climate change, global warming, and the need for energy transition. You also see from the graph, as you realize, this is how the trend went in. You can see that for a long time, we were using coal, small coal, biomass, charcoal, until the 80s when gas was discovered and oil was discovered. And you can see the rate at which the whole world is burning fuel and contributing to CO2 emissions. And the situation is what has led to what today we call energy transition. And if we talk about energy transition, nuclear emits no carbon dioxide. So nuclear has, the opportunity to transition to minimize our emissions. Renewable energy, we all know, is an environmentally friendly option. Today, even though methane gas, natural gas, emits CO2, compared to liquid fuels, it is termed to be a less dangerous, or it emits less gas than oil. If you look at this graph just shows where nuclear plants are installed. And show me a country with at least one nuclear power plant, and I can tell you that that country is industrialized. Yes, look at it. Where do we have the nuclear power plants? You can see in the US, in the whole of Europe, go towards the Asia, Japan, Korea, China, portions of India, and the whole of Africa. We have only one nuclear power plant, and that is in South Africa. It is therefore not surprising that South Africa is the only industrialized country on the continent. That's the only place you can see a lot of industrial activities taking place, and I will, with time, demonstrate it. You also notice that Africa abounds with so much natural resources. We have the diamond, we have the copper, we have the coal. Just mention it. You can find all these things in Africa. And again, in Africa, our land is also very fertile. Just dig a hole and put maize there, and in 3 days' time, you find it germinating, irrespective of the time. It tells you that we have all the resources we need to survive and not be hungry. And when it comes to energy, all the energy that is required to add value to our abundant mineral resources also abounds in Africa. We have the hydropower plants. Africa has exploited only 15% of our hydro resources, compared to 85% in Europe or in the US. We have natural gas. Most of them are still underdeveloped. We have petroleum products. In fact, if you count the top 5 of oil-producing countries, you can find one in Africa. We have the petroleum products. We have the uranium to support nuclear activities. We have biomass. We have the solar. And so we have all that it takes to add value to our abundant natural resources. But why are we still poor? Why are we where we are? When it comes to carbon dioxide emissions, you can see from the graph, most African countries, our emissions are very, very low. Very, very low compared to Europe, China, Japan, etc., in terms of per capita emissions. Most countries in Africa have low CO2 emissions, and so what do? Our emissions are low, we have the coal, we have all the resources. Should we sit and say energy transition? Let's just sit and not add value to what we have. When we talk about greenhouse gas, energy transition, I think the issue is not necessarily Africa. Africa, we are still burning charcoal and wood. If you transition to gas, you consume more CO2, you emit more CO2. But we need this modern fuel to improve our lives, to improve the lives of women and children. We need these modern fuels. Our children need to also take advantage of the light, use the computers. And if you are to use electricity to produce this, you by all means will emit more CO2. And that is what we need. Go to the countryside. We are still using push tracks. Our women and children are sitting on trade cycle, motorbikes, etc. In terms of transportation, they are still carrying things over their head. If we are to transition to run on cars, which is modern, we will be emitting more CO2. Should we say that we shouldn't emit CO2 because China, America have destroyed the environment with too much emissions, so we should sit where we are? That is a question for us. Most industrialized countries have no resource of their own. I know Korea is represented here. What resource do they have? Germany, what resource do they have? They come and pick the resources in Africa. They pick your diamond, your gold. They add value to it. Even the value, they come for coal from Africa. Add value to it. And then they come and sell it back to us at a higher price. Korea takes oil from Nigeria. Crude oil. Takes it all the way to Korea. Refines it with their nuclear power plants to produce petrol and diesel. And they bring it back to us at a higher cost. What prevents us as Africa from uniting and adding value to the resources we have? It is about time Africa comes together. Why should we export raw cocoa beans only to import chocolate? Today, if you want the best ornaments, you have to go to Dubai to buy gold. Meanwhile, the gold is in Africa. It is about time we unite to come together and follow the same path that America, China, Europe, the same path that they've taken, so that we can add value to the abundant resources we have. If we don't do that, and we start competing among ourselves, we will be where we are, and the other countries will be leading the fall. In terms of cost, take a look at this graph. This is the energy production cost. You will see clearly that oil is the most expensive source of fuel for generating electricity. The cheapest is gas, coal, nuclear. If you have hydro, all the better. So it is therefore not surprising that most developed industrialized countries rely on coal, natural gas, and nuclear. This is the profile for USA. Let's take a look at Japan. You can see Japan uses mainly coal, nuclear, natural gas. After Fukushima disaster in 2012, nuclear came down. Go back to Japan today. The dependence on nuclear is increasing. Why? Because nuclear offers cheaper source of power. Take Korea. Look at Korea. In fact, if you compare the generation in 1990, Korea's power generation was less than half of that of Japan. But today, look at where they are. Same way, take Germany and India. Germany, as at 1990, their power demand was somewhere around 300, 250, thereabout. Whereas Korea was far, far below 100. Today, Korea's total generation is more than 2 times the generation of Germany. Why? Because Korea has seen the secret, Indians have seen the secret in, generating cheap power from coal. It is therefore not surprising that today when you go to India, you find a lot of German companies migrating from Germany to India to produce there. And by doing so, job is created. Industrialization is taking place. It is about time Africa takes a clue from this and learn from it. Look at South Africa. South Africa, as at 1990, relied mainly on coal and nuclear. It was therefore not surprising that South Africa was the manufacturing base for Africa. But after apartheid, the dependence went down, down, down. Take Malaysia, for instance. They have also seen the secret in producing cheap power, and that is how come Malaysia is being industrialized. Malaysia took a conscious decision not to go coal, not to go nuclear, but they have decided to use cheap power, and the cheap power they are using is mainly from coal, natural gas, and hydropower. You can see their dependence on oil has been very minimal. Look at China. See the rate at which China is using coal. You can just imagine it. Yes, China in 2020, during the COVID alone, just 1 year, added 34 gigawatts of installed capacity, just from coal, just 1 year. And today, when we talk about nuclear, China is the world's largest producer of nuclear power. They have about 55 plants, and as we talk, 22 nuclear power plants are under construction, and they have in mind to install another 70 more nuclear power plants by the year 2030, just 6 years ahead. These informations are available on the net. You can all check up. Look at Ghana. We pride ourselves to have enough generation. But what is our capacity? Just around 5 gigawatts. China added 34 gigawatts in 1 year. Ghana, for over 50 years, we have only 5 gigawatts. And we say we have excess generation? No. So what are the key takeaways? Africa needs reliable power to develop. Natural gas, large hydros, clean coal, nuclear remains the most sustainable and cheaper energy options. And it is about time we come together to see how best we can take advantage of the abundant resource we have. Africa needs to follow the examples of China, India, and Malaysia if we want to add value to the abundant resources we have. If we want to add value to create more jobs so that our African brothers and sisters don't run to Europe and America in search of greener pastures. It is, sometimes I say it like food. Africa, we need firm energy if we have to industrialize. You don't industrialize on the backbone of coal, solar and wind. Yes, they have a role to play, but we don't do that. It's like food. If you are hungry and there's no food, you can make do with watermelon and banana. But where you need energy to dig the ground, very soon we'll be going for lunch, and I'll stand to watch to see those who will go for the watermelons and the fruits instead of the main meal. You need a heavy meal to be able to dig the ground. If Africa is to industrialize, we need the heavy meals. What Europe has done, we need the nuclear, we need the coal, we need the natural gas, we need the large hydros. This is what we need to industrialize Africa, not solar, not wind. Solar has a role to play, but industrialization, we need a heavy meal. Let's take Ghana, for instance. Ghana, this is our generation mix. Installed capacity, just around 5.4 megawatts. And if you look at our trend, the dependence, yes, dependence on residential consumption of electricity is on the increase. But take a look at the industrial sector. The increase is minimal. We have not done much as far as industry is concerned. We need to add value. If we take agric, the contribution of electricity in the agriculture sector and in the transport sector is almost negligible. But if we use cheap power from coal, cheap power from nuclear, cheap power from natural gas, we stand a chance to use this power to support irrigation, to support mechanization, and that is what will create the jobs and bring money into our pockets. Access to cheap power, and I keep repeating it. Coal comes cheap. Nuclear comes cheap. Natural gas comes cheap. If you have to use solar and wind, you may want to use a storage system, and that makes it more expensive. So let us focus on cheap power. Industrial activities in all forms have direct negative impact on the environment. But in any case, our environmental footprints are very low. If you look at the graph I showed, most of these industrialized countries signed the Paris Agreement in 2015. But between 2015 And now you can see that they have all increased their consumption of coal and oil. And we are being told, don't increase coal, don't use coal, use solar, use wind. How can we develop, how can we industrialize on the backbone of this? However, well, the international community is calling all of us to transition. And Ghana is also committed to this transition. And because of that, we've prepared a national energy transition framework, which outlines the policy directions for the transition. And I believe that is the main subject for my presentation. These are the objectives of it: to identify viable pathways, harness the opportunities for fair and equitable transition, evaluate the impact of the transition, and then we develop medium to long-term targets. And in doing so, this is what Ghana's transition framework looked at. Yes, at the moment, our dependence is mainly on natural gas, you can see. Our dependence is mainly on natural gas, which is the yellow mark, and it is our plan, based on the Nuclear Power Ghana projections, that by 2030, we should be able to have our first nuclear power plant in operation. And we believe that if we do that, we'll increase, it will contribute 5% of our target coming from nuclear, where gas will be 70% and then renewable energy will be 26%. Currently, renewable energy is about 32, 33%, mainly from large hydro and solar. And our transition plan towards zero emission is to increase our dependence on nuclear. And this is how it is. We believe that by 2070, we'll have as much as 46% of our electricity generation coming from nuclear, 34% coming from natural gas, and 20% coming from renewable energy. This is what we could do. But if the countries that are pushing transition, UK is reactivating their coal power plants, Germany is destroying their wind turbines to mine coal under it. These are countries pushing energy transition. But they see the need for cheap power, and they are going ahead. What is preventing us from sitting idle? Nuclear. Why nuclear power in Ghana? Just a little. I believe my colleagues have said the history already, and I wouldn't say much. But the decision was considered purely on economics. And this decision was taken as far back as 1963. But it was shelved until 2008, when a cabinet decision was taken for us to include nuclear in our energy mix. And since then, all efforts have been made, irrespective of the parties that are in power. They have all supported the drive for nuclear. Since 2008, we have 2009, nuclear was included in the energy policy scheme, and the Ghana Nuclear Power Organization was established. In 2017, when power was changed, the new government proceeded to establish the owner-operator organization, which I believe my colleagues here have said a lot about it. And clearly, you will see that nuclear is an agenda which is top priority for all governments, because that is the only way we can add value to our abundant resources. If you say we shouldn't use coal because it emits so much CO2, we have the nuclear. Go to Niger, uranium. We have the uranium in Africa. We don't need to go outside the continent to get the fuel we need to drive nuclear. And affordable power. Ghana needs to sustain its industrial efforts. And we need to add value to our iron ore. We have bauxite, we have gold, we have manganese, we have cocoa. But we give all these things out for free, for peanuts, when we could add value to them. Coal, natural gas, and I want to emphasize this, coal, natural gas, nuclear power are the only available options for cheap power. We have exploited all our large hydros. Those that are left are quite very small. And we should think about how do we push nuclear on our agenda. The only thing a lot of people say about nuclear is that how safe is it? How can we manage the waste? And we try to bother ourselves with it. It's like air travel. We all know that if you fly in the plane and there's an accident, probability of dying is almost 99%. But yet still, the air travel is considered the safest means of transport. Am I right? Yes, it's the safest means of transport. Why? Because the institutions have put in place the right regulatory framework to make sure that no mistake is taken. Yes, we had a lot of accidents. So far, we've had only 3 accidents, 3 nuclear disasters. The first one in the US, 1979. Then 1986, we had the Chernobyl one. And 2001, we had the Fukushima disaster. Just 3 accidents. But the International Atomic Energy Agency has put in place very tight, stringent measures to make sure that such disasters are not repeated. If you look at the loss of lives when it comes to nuclear, you realize that that of Chernobyl recorded 31 deaths, 2 of which were due to initial exposure, and the other ones were as a result of subsequent acute radiation sickness. But in the case of Fukushima, even though the earthquake claimed 20,000 lives, about 20,000 lives, only one, and I mean only one officially recognized death was a result of radiation exposure. However, additional 573 deaths occurred as a result of evacuation and movement of people. But in terms of radiation exposure, only one. That's the data from International Atomic Energy Agency. And what about the disaster in the US? 0. There were no deaths. So why will you say that nuclear is dangerous, nuclear is safe? And out of, as of 2021, out of the 667 nuclear power plants built since 1951, only 3 major accidents have occurred. How many road accidents do we find in our various countries? How many lives are lost due to road accidents? Do we say those who died from air crash, so you will not fly by air and you rather travel by sea? No. The official internationally recognized death statistics for the combined loss of lives for the 3 major nuclear accidents is only 32. Just 32. But I'll show you what happens in for the other generations. And so far, when we talk about the deaths per 1,000 terawatt hours for the energy options, I mean, nuclear tends to be the lowest. Look at coal, as much as 1 million deaths per 1,000 terawatt hours. The data is there for you to see. Even wind and solar, the number of deaths are more than nuclear. Nuclear is only 90. The data is available, you can easily check. If we talk about nuclear countries, countries that are leading in renewable energy, countries that are leading in solar and wind, first of all, had nuclear power plants. You need a stable base load to allow the intermittencies and the variable renewables to play in. So you take United States, China, France, these are countries leading in nuclear. And it is not surprising that they are countries leading in the variable renewable energies. So if you don't have a stable base load, if you don't have the nuclear or natural gas or hydro as stable base load, and you want to focus on solar and wind, you destroy the grid. You destroy the grid and you will not have anything at all. So in conclusion, let me say that the Ministry of Energy in Ghana, or the government of Ghana, has put in place a robust energy transition framework towards achieving net zero. Renewable energy, including large hydro, natural gas, nuclear, will be the main transition fuel for the power sector. Policies and strategies have been put in place to make sure that industries get access to this reliable power once we are able to develop them. Nuclear power has the potential to provide affordable power to drive industrialization in Ghana. We all know the benefits. It's environmentally very friendly. It emits no natural gas. It is safe, and it has the lowest mortality rate. And like I said earlier on, the International Atomic Energy Agency has put in place strict regulatory measures to minimize future accidents. And it is about time all of us, including the media here present, take advantage of it to educate the masses on the benefits of nuclear, because that is one sure way of adding value to our energy scheme. And on this note, I want to say a very big thank you to you, but I want to urge African countries, this is not the time to compete among ourselves. Ghana is putting nuclear, the next country, Burkina Faso or Nigeria, is putting nuclear. Why can't we come together, plan it? You are giving me the resource. This country does coal, another country does nuclear, and we have a robust transmission network which will support industrialization in Africa. This is what we need. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to the time, we won't have any time for questions. So what I'd like you to do is to thank, again, Mr. Wisdom for all of the great presentation. It was certainly
A 300 megawatt SMR based on a novel and patented design using liquid metallic uranium as a fuel and liquid lead as a coolant. If you're interested in the specifics, that's not part of the panel right now. We consider Africa being a very interesting target market for this, in particular for this size of reactors. Now, it is in the DNA of everyone in the nuclear industry to put nuclear safety at the top of priorities. However, for nuclear power to be an efficient means of energy provision, we need regulation processes that build on science and technology alone, and I will get a little bit into this. As a nuclear startup, we are not experts in nuclear regulation, obviously, but future customers of regulation authorities and hope for lean but efficient regulatory processes. To frame our discussion, therefore, I'd like to share three thoughts to kick off the discussion. Regulation is one of the key drivers for the efficient deployment of nuclear energy. In my view, African countries need to seize the immense opportunity that comes with being new entrants. As newcomers, they can leap directly to best-in-class nuclear regulation, and they should try to do so. And one example is, so you don't have landlines in Ghana, all the telecommunication is done leapfrogged to mobiles, to cell phones. Now, the effort of building up a nuclear regulation system, so both the rule book and the regulator and the institutions are enormous, obviously. Today, African countries cooperate intensely, we've heard this since yesterday, on the topic of nuclear regulation. Ideally, I believe they should build one regulator who works for all African countries. One important advantage would be that a nuclear reactor design license in one country could easily be built in a neighboring country. And with this comes, of course, a steep learning curve. African nuclear regulation, third, cannot be copied from Western rule books. I might say this in particular as a German national. In both North America and in Europe, there have always been over the last decades sometimes anti-nuclear governments that misused essentially nuclear regulation to make it more expensive than it has to be. Instead, the IAEA has proven to be very competent in building up rule books that are far more efficient than those in so-called established nuclear countries, but those countries tend to be over-bureaucratic, and I might say so that the NRC, the US regulator, has managed to license exactly one nuclear reactor in the last 40 years. So you might like it or not, but I know that there's a lot of discussions going on in the US on this situation. All in all, nuclear regulation in Africa should be viewed as a tremendous opportunity to create a positive impact for your countries, streamline processes, and build up a huge talent pool. With this, I'd like to introduce the panel. We have the Director Generals of the 4 regulation bodies of Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, and Nigeria, but one is apparently missing, so maybe I So Dr. Nii Allotey is the Director General of Nuclear Regulation Authority in Ghana. Good morning. Dr. Akisophel Kisolo, Chairperson of the Atomic Energy Council in Uganda. We have met. Thank you. James Chumba, Director General of the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. Is that you? Wonderful. Then we might miss Dr. Yao Idris, Director General of the Nigerian Nuclear Regulator. Is he? Didn't? Okay, then there's a chair left for me. That's good. By the way, one word to wisdom, talking about Germany, where is he? I agree with nearly everything you said, but mining was actually invented in Germany because we're one of the mineral richest countries of the world, except that after we lost the World War, the Americans made sure we didn't exploit our resources. So that's why we are coming to Africa and generating the myth of being a resource-poor country. We are not, but that might be a story for a beer in the evening. Okay, so I think we need to first understand where we stand, and then we might be able to develop this further. Is this the only microphone? Okay. Then why don't you just start, what is the experience in your country? How far are you with building up the regulation system, so both the institution and the rule book, and to whom do you rely in building this up?
Thank you, Peters. I find it difficult pronouncing the first John Peters.
Björn means bear in the Swedish language, I'm afraid so. But there was a famous tennis player in the 1980s with my name.
Thank you. And it's wonderful, the delegates in this conference. My name is James Chumba, the Director General, Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority. As a country, our journey began about 10 years ago. Then, when we made a decision that maybe we should explore energy production by nuclear, then the question is, who is going to regulate? And having a regulator in a society brings confidence in the sense that when people voice their concerns, there must be a place to direct those concerns. And the regulatory body or an institution which is able to come out in plain language telling them that it is okay. So Kenya began that journey in 2010. We looked around and said that we want to establish a comprehensive regulatory framework. We sat down, we drafted the law, took many years back and forth. We consulted far and wide. We had several drafts. Our lawyers and our system of passing legislation, being very stringent, goes to Parliament. Then after our 2010 constitution, you have to involve the stakeholders. We went around the country and we finally got our law in 2019 called the Nuclear Regulatory Act. We are proud of having that law, and we are at a stage where we want to implement, and in implementing we develop subsidiary legislation, that is the regulations. Again, we have to take our time, put our efforts to ensure that what we put in the regulations is also able to come up with requirements that gives confidence to the public, so that when we are spearheading the program, there is someone else giving confidence to the public. So at the Kenyan Nuclear Regulatory Authority, we are operationalizing our law by developing regulations, and again, we are consulting very widely. We are looking at our partners abroad, of course, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the US, and the good thing of where we are currently in Africa, which gives us an opportunity to have documents or laws having a fact that we have countries, developed countries that have traveled this journey. We are able to look at which of the best can we tap and incorporate in our regulatory framework. Thank you.
Maybe some very practical questions. How many people work in your institution?
What we did as an organization is we had a regulator that was in charge of conventional radiation sources, which basically we transformed or rather upgraded it into an authority to regulate the nuclear industry. So currently we have over 80 people, but the technical staff, which we have attempted over the years when we started the program, just like yesterday, my colleague from the promoter was presenting here, is we have made a lot of efforts not only to train the people who will be the owner-operator or those spearheading the program, but we have also been training people to be identified in the regulatory body. So in my regulatory body, we have over 20 of staff who have trained in nuclear engineering, very much conversant, and we continue to build that capacity together with promoters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Akisophel, so what's the situation in Uganda?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Now, my name is Akisophel Kisolo, the Chairperson, Atomic Energy Council. Our journey in Uganda started more or less like my neighbor has stated it in Kenya. For us in 2008, we passed a law, the Atomic Energy Act, which establishes and ensures that atomic energy is used properly. And this law has been doing well until government took a decision to go nuclear or introduce nuclear in the mix. After that decision had been taken, we again had to revisit the law and see how it can be used. We found, of course, that the first law was mainly concerned about radiation protection and safety. It did not take care of security and safeguards and establishment of nuclear institutions. So we are now in an advanced state of amending or revising or changing that law so that we can have our nuclear institutions set up properly in the country. As we all know, the main role of the regulator is to issue regulations, issue authorizations, and things like that. But all these actually emanates from the primary law, the main act. So we are trying to do that. And when you look at how do we support government, in whatever we are doing, including the revision of the law, we have to work very closely with government. Because as a regulator, we are what our colleague, the previous speaker has said, a team of people in the country who are ensuring that nuclear is delivered safely and securely in the country. So we work with the senior regulators, bilateral, multilateral, including agencies like the International Atomic Energy, to ensure that as a country we adopt the best practice and our institutions, the nuclear institutions we are installing, are safe to the workers, safe to the community, and safe to the environment. So we do promote them, government, in that direction. Also, when we are working, we should also be listening to what government is saying. If government comes today, like they have said, we are doing site selection, then as a regulator, we again start running fast for how to issue regulations and guidelines on how site selection, site evaluation, or even licensing the technology is going to be done. So we should be able as regulators to run fast with speed and accuracy to ensure that we work together with government and achieve the government goals objectively while conscious of safety, security, and other international obligations. So there are many things we can do as regulators. Of course, the same thing also applies to other regulatory activities like authorization and whatever. We should be able to say, right, you are starting, but look at the offers or applications very objectively. We should try to be as practical, formal, have things done according to established standards and procedures of the regulator, which are also consistent with international best practice. And this can go on and go on. But of course there is also support which we can get from our counterparts, the senior regulators ahead of us. The countries which have been practicing and bilaterally have been helping us also to build capacity. So there are those senior regulators whom can assist us, and also within Africa itself, we have been working as a team of regulators through the International Atomic Energy Agency at one time. We had Africa Regulatory Forum. And I think in that forum we have one of us here who was a chairperson for some time, where we are now looking at our senior regulators within Africa, say like South Africa, which is practicing, to help train our regulators and also at the same time our staff into the latest development in this technology of nuclear regulation. So we use those, we use existing bilateral relationship. We also use the vendors, those who provide services. Because within the vendors themselves, you find experts. So it is useful to try and keep learning and keep progressing and making sure that we are protecting our people, the environment, and doing things rightly. of course, the chairman was asking whether we can have the best practice in Africa now that we are starting after our friends in Europe, America, and what have you have been practicing and are available to help us. Of course, having identical regulation is ideal because it would be easier to go and learn and add skills and experience. But of course, much of the training or the skills are technology or vendor or whoever is concerned. So you'll find that there will be those challenges. Whoever is getting a technology gets some training. And again, national interests are also vary. National interests, national priorities. We can try to do that to the best of our knowledge, but I do support your position that I wish we could all have very similar technology so that when you are doing something, I will send a regulator from Uganda to participate and we don't have to repeat. But because of differences in technology, differences of national priorities and what have you, it will become an issue on how best to proceed. So I think that's the situation in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've put Ghana last, not because I'm impolite, here's the host country, but yesterday we heard that Ghana wants to be a role model, and that's the reason why I was very curious about how far you've gone with regulation in Ghana already.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a long story. I'll just cut it short. But you know what you call it? Our history dates back to the 60s, and what you call it? Ghana Atomic Energy Commission was formed. So what do you call it? Ghana Atomic Energy Commission was playing both a promotion aspect and a regulatory aspect. So what do you call it? We came up with a law in 2015, and then we split the two parts. So in terms of Ghana, we have a research reactor, and we also have a lot of radiation sources and radiation emitting devices. So we actually, in terms of moving into the regulatory aspect for our nuclear power program, we are not starting from scratch, like we're starting from scratch. We actually have some bases because of the research reactor. But we've had to actually move initially with developing our whole set of regulations for the nuclear power program and for nuclear installations in particular. We virtually gone past that, but we are now in the promulgation stage for most of them. And we have now, what do you call it, gone to the area of now developing a number of guides to actually help with the program. Now, like my other colleagues have said, we've not done this alone. We've done this with a lot of support from our bilateral and international partners. So we've actually moved along ahead with that. Our number, our current numbers are about 85, 86 now. We have an HR plan that was developed as part of our program comprehensive report that we did for the whole program, and it sees us increasing our numbers to about 160, 170 by the time operation starts. So that is how we are moving. And now what we are basically doing a lot is to develop all the soft infrastructure needed for the nuclear power program. We are developing our IT infrastructure. We are also developing our management system, or what do you call it, to actually guide us in terms of how the management of all our activities and quality issues are actually taken into account. So we are working on that a lot. And once that is done, the key area that we are working on now is to develop our competency and our capability to do a good review and assessment for what do you call it, all the license submittals that would actually come our way. So that's where we are now as a country. And I must say that when we started, we realized that in terms of our regulatory oversight approach, we looked at going full prescriptive like the US NRC does in a lot of ways. We looked at the performance-based approach, and we realized that we needed a bit more skill in that. So we decided that in terms of our regulatory oversight and framework approach, we would actually choose a hybrid of the two. So that's the approach in which we're actually using in terms of developing our regulatory infrastructure. So that's where we are as Ghana. Thank you.
I mean, immediately the question that arises is how can the nuclear regulator is an enabler of this transition, of course, towards cleaner energy. Akisophel mentioned that there might be national priorities that are important to set, and that might be an impediment to creating more collaboration among regulators, or even doing certain steps all together in a joint organization. What is your view on this?
You see, actually, we in Ghana, what do you call it, at least at the national level, okay, the program runs. So we, the regulator, are part of the GNPPO, the Ghana Nuclear Power Program Organization. And we've recognized that doing things in our country nationally is important, but looking at it on a regional basis is also very, very important. But in terms of to be able to have one regulation used in various countries, okay, we realize that the countries are quite different in the way they actually run. So we in Ghana have actually taken a stand that the African regional group of regulators called the AFNBP, okay, it's a very key step that actually regionally we can actually use to advance our cause a lot. We have what do you call it? One of our directors, Professor Emmanuel Amako, he's actually there. Actually, he's the secretary to the AFNBP, and we commit a lot of support for him to do his work. And we are very active, and we feel that once we actually work in that space, okay, support other African regulators and get support from other African regulators, we can actually move together and actually have a more consistent system across the African region. Looking at it as doing things fully together, that one, in our point of view, it looks quite difficult from our point of view. But we think this approach regionally, if all the countries involved will commit to it, it will be very supportive. We've seen it supportive in some other areas. Some like now, we have one project that is being funded by one of the international organizations, and then bringing all the various countries together, and we're actually sharing the experience across all of them. That is very supportive, and it moves us in the right direction. And then linked to that also, to actually add to that, the IAEA National Harmonization Initiative, as it goes on and we pick from it, and we use it in that regional framework, I believe it will actually help us to have a more overall consistent approach by which we all move forward. So actually, this is our position in Ghana. Thank you.
As a customer of your, a potential customer of your organization, I have a question. So the obvious goals of regulation it's just a handful of them. So it's the control of nuclear fission reaction, it's the control of the containment, so no contamination. It is about the supply chain and everything there, and it's about proliferation. I can't come up with much more questions. And all of those are subject to STEM topics, but not necessarily to policies. Maybe James has an opinion on this. So I still don't really get the where the national interest supersedes those obvious targets. Maybe you have an idea on this?
John, forgive me if I didn't get it right, because...
So the natural targets of nuclear regulation all come from STEM topics, so from science and technology, and there is best practice which is universal, so it would even work on an exoplanet, and certainly on every country of the world. So where is the national interest in, particularly in such a topic like regulation, interfering with your work?
You are very right. The STEM subjects, they tend to play a major role in building, or rather being put in developing the regulatory framework. For sure, you find that in most of our countries, emphasis has been put on education, ensuring that you improve, or rather increase, the literacy in a country. So I can give an example in my country is when we started the nuclear power program, we not only focused on the mature population, but we started going back to the schools, the middle level school, lower schools, and looking at what is needed in this program. Not only the STEM dominates for sure, but we came to realize that there's so much to look at. I can give an example of the number of contracts that you can come with during the nuclear power program. Then automatically we look at the legal profession. So emphasis is put right from learning institutions. Then as a country, we for sure know that we can prioritize areas that is going to support the nuclear power program. So we identify institutions, right from the technical institutions, the universities. We even realize that professions such as like welding, and I'm glad that Ghana has taken a step and even signing a memorandum of understanding with the US in terms of even that very important critical element that it is difficult to be found in our countries, welding. So for sure, it is an approach that has to be well thought of, building capacity right from areas that we feel or we felt like we may not need in future. But again, it is not enough to do it in our countries. We must work very closely with our partners. Again, I say, those partners that have walked the journey, they own the technology. There's so much that is happening in the nuclear industry in terms of even the technology design. So as even a regulatory body is, at what point do we come up with model regulations, or you just wait until you identify the design, then you tend to zero in and put your regulations, requirements and guidance document towards that particular design. So you find that, John, that sometimes we find ourselves in Africa, talking to ourselves, looking at what others are doing, we learn from them, then there is a possibility that we are going to be better because we have information, we have ideas, we know what is needed, what is required. So it is an opportunity for Africa, like you said, to have a wholesome approach and look at our systems. Do we build a framework where we are talking to each other? Could we be able maybe to identify a particular technology that is friendly to our regulatory framework? So we have an opportunity as Africa to build robust regulatory framework, and in doing so, we have started, I can give an example in my country, is together with my brother from Uganda. We started long time ago talking of putting in place instrument, memorandum of understanding, with even Ethiopia, despite the fact that they have their own system of developing their laws. But when we talk of nuclear, we can't be able to talk the same language. And a professional in Uganda who has done STEM or who is in legal practice can be able to talk the same language while in Kenya or while in Ghana. So this uniformity for sure, and we must appreciate that the international standards that are there are well supportive of the efforts that we are undertaking. Sure.
Actually, that would be a very good final remark. And would you like to add something? Akisophel?
Yeah, thank you. I think my neighbor in Kenya has just mentioned MOU between regulators in Kenya and Uganda. We started that, but for one reason, it was finding small hiccups, like who signs on the MOU, you agree. In Uganda, the chair could sign. In Kenya, it is the PS or something. So it became kind of issues or differences in law. In Tanzania, we have a working MOU between the Atomic Energy Council and the Tanzania Atomic Energy Commission. The same thing also applies with we called yesterday Dr. Congo, or Democratic Republic of Congo. Yeah, we also had an MOU, which in a way is good. And like now we are saying, when we go towards nuclear, we should, like I think one of my colleague from Tanzania said, that if Uganda is making movements, we should be reporting to Tanzania, Kenya, Zaire, Sudan, Rwanda, what we are doing, because of those liability issues. Thank you.
I just want to also make some point that, you see, every African country developing nuclear gets support from the IAEA. All right. So that's a standard thing that almost all our countries are doing. If you go and you look at how the structure of the regulatory body is set up in all the countries, they are all doing safety, security, safeguards. Because what do you call it? We work with the IAEA, and the IAEA advises us to actually go on that approach. So because our initial sources are similar, even if you go to the regulatory framework and the documents, I've seen that from Nigeria, I've seen that from that. The style might be different, but the approach is very similar. All right. So I think that we don't have a lot of divisions in terms of how our regulatory oversight will be done. But I think what is important is an understanding and a level of cooperation at some level. All right. Once that is established, there can be support moving from one country to another country. I think this is where the whole African region in that sense can actually move. Thank you.
Makes absolutely sense, and very happy to hear this. Are there questions from the audience to our regulators? Over there? Okay.
Just a question for each of them. Just how are you addressing nuclear liability in your regulatory scheme in each country?
Starting with the host, Ghana.
Yeah, and Ghana is most developed.
Okay, what do you call it? We have actually signed to all the liability treaties and regimes in Ghana. So now, what do you call it? We have actually now completed a regulation on civil liability for nuclear damage. All right, so that will go through the process and everything of promulgation, and then we would actually have a regulation for that. So what we're also doing linked to that is that we are trying to get our insurance groups together and then see how to actually establish, understand the challenges our insurance organizations will have, and then we actually see how to develop that industry going forward. So that's where we are as Ghana on that.
Okay, for Uganda, as I told you, we are trying to work on the law, so we really haven't fixed those things.
Thank you for that question. For Kenya, when we were making the Nuclear Regulatory Act, there was a push and pull. At one point one of the draft had nuclear civil liability, and then a decision was reached that nuclear damage liability will be addressed in another set of legislation, which I can, without preempting what my colleague from Ghana has mentioned, is first was we will be able to do an analysis to understand the scope. And in understanding the scope is first we looked at it from let's proceed. By the time we identify the owner operator, we will have another law on nuclear the civil liability. And in doing that, we will look at what is it we will be handling. Do we look at only ourselves? Because nuclear is transboundary. We look at our neighbors. We look at the existing international best practices. Definitely, from where we sit as a country is we are going to learn, of course not copy, we are going to learn and understand what happens in mature regulatory bodies or countries that have been in this business for long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I might have one. There are a number of, yesterday we have heard a number of speeches about more or less mostly state-owned nuclear developers. Some of them have brought the nuclear safety enormously high by simply technology. Some models work on inherent safety. Is that an aspect that is important for your rule book?
Safety, security, safeguards being the main principles or what a regulatory framework should entail is When you look at even our law protecting the people, the public, the environment, and their property. So at the end of the day, whatever we do when we walk into those offices and look smart and ready to serve, we are serving the people because of the safety. So whether inherent or added, we will continue to ensure as a regulatory body we protect the people, their property, and the environment.
I think I do agree.
That's a very interesting question. In Ghana, when we were developing our regulations, in the process of doing that, our owner, operator, or our promoter has not yet decided where they are going. Up to now, they are making a decision on that. So we developed our regulations generally from general existing large plants, all right, a point of view, okay. Now, we've come back to recognize that our promoters might actually go with some of the new plants that are coming, which actually have these inherent features. So we've decided to look back at our regulations and then see areas that are not covered, all right, with those new passive systems, inherent passive systems and other things. And then we have an addendum there, okay, which would actually cater for that. So that's how we are actually working at being ready to actually provide regulatory oversight for new developments that actually have the inherent features. That's how we are handling it.
Interesting. Yes, Donald? Yes. Yes, please. So I thank you, and please give an applaud to our panelists.
Please stay. What a privilege it was. I only got to hear a part of this, but the reality is that Africa has so many intelligent, capable, competent, committed, and passionate individuals to facilitate a successful nuclear program, as evidenced by these three regulatory authorities' heads right here. And we're proud of that. I know in the rest of the world, I'm a former regulator, and once you're a regulator, you're always a regulator. Don't even think about it. I mean, you might go to do something else, but the fact is you still think like one. I had the privilege of being a director with our Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1980 to 85 when I was responsible for licensing 26 plants in 5 years. And in the United States, under Part 50, that's 2 licenses. We issued 52 licenses in 61 months. Now think about that. We were issuing almost a license a month. Now on the planet, we issue a license every decade. Now, what that proves, however, is that if you bring the right approach and the right information and the right background, it's amazing what kinds of things can be done. So these individuals are establishing appropriate, transparent, confident, and capable regulation in their respective countries to give their stakeholders, the public, the government, everyone, the media, the confidence that this process will move forward. Around the world, we've seen a lot of different things, and I'm sure you've heard of them, and they all haven't gone well. And in the last 40 years since I've started this company, I've seen a lot of that. What we want to do is to make sure that these three individuals and all of the African regulators are informed and provided all the tools and information and capabilities to assure their success, to enable them to learn quickly, because their learning curve looks like this, to be able to do the reviews that are necessary for all kinds of reactor technologies, large, small, mini, and micro. So it's a privilege for me to be here, to be interfacing with my colleagues, my fellow colleagues in regulatory authorities, and for you to have the confidence that these individuals know how to go forward. So with that, I have the privilege of providing a presentation this afternoon where I will talk about some of the tools we're implementing around the world and how well those are working and how they could also be applicable here. With that, it is almost 11 o'clock. It is time for our first morning break, and that morning break is sponsored by Dual Fluid. Let me give you credit for that, my dear friend. And also to ask you to be back here at 11:25 a.m. to keep us on schedule. Thank you. Have a good morning. And again, thank our fellow regulators.